Good evening. My name is John Cranfield. I'm a professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph. And I'm also the Associate Dean for External Relations in the Ontario Agricultural College here at Guelph. It's my distinct pleasure to host you at tonight's event. We're here through the support of the OAC Class of 1959 Future Thinkers Fund. I want to bring my sincerest thanks to that OAC Class of 59 for establishing this fund and supporting their support that allows us to host an event like tonight's conversation. This conference is fundamentally about caring for soil, the land. As the University of Guelph works towards peace and reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and all who call this land home, we invite you to take a moment to consider the lands that we work and live on, the stories that have been made here, the children who have been raised here, the loved ones who have passed on from here. Land is precious and must be protected so that the future generations can share in the joy and the flourish of this land. So tonight, I'm really pleased to introduce the first of our two speakers. Our moderator, Mel Luymes, is a freelance sociologist, a farm coach, and a writer. Her family runs a grain farm and custom farming business near Moorfield, Ontario, where they use precision cover crops, no-till, strip-till on their own fields. Co-founder of the Ontario Soil Network, Mel loves to work at the intersection of agriculture, behavioral change, and the environment. Our keynote speaker, Roger Martin, is Professor Emeritus at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. He served as Dean in the Rotman School from 1989 to 2013 and as Institute Director of the Martin Prosperity Institute from 2013 to 2019. In 2013, he was named the Global Dean of the Year, and in 2017, he was named the world's #1 management thinker. He's published 11 books, including recently Creating Great Choices with Jennifer Rayl, Getting Beyond Better with Sally Osborne, and Playing to Win with AJ Lafley. The latter book won the award for the best book of 2012-2013 by 50 thinkers. Roger has written 28 Harvard Business Review articles and is a trusted strategic advisor to CEOs on many global companies, and originally hails from Wallenstein, Ontario, not far from here in Guelph. Welcome to you both, and we're looking forward to your conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, John. And welcome, Roger. I just want to thank you for joining us this evening, and also thank you for writing this incredible book. And I'm happy that it's gaining the recognition it has, not only for your career, but because this is just a really important topic. And it's different than other management books, not just about our own businesses and our own thinking, but really took a step back and looking at the bigger picture and the economy. And I found it a really hopeful challenge. So thank you for that. To start, you were a country boy, like probably a lot of people watching tonight. I know Wallenstein very well, and it is a very small town.
But you're one of the few people in the world who know Wallenstein.
You'd be maybe surprised on this call. But and then from Wallenstein to Elmira District Secondary School to Harvard. How did those small town roots, what did you take from that to the big city and on into your career?
I guess I think, Mel, that coming from a small town, and as you probably know, when I was growing up, it was about 50 of us in Wallenstein. It's gigantic now. There's probably 200, maybe even 250 in Wallenstein, but huge. I think I had a sense that you could kind of get your arms around whatever situation or problem you were facing, because Wallenstein wasn't a complicated place, and so you could say, I can kind of understand this. I understand who the people are and what they're doing, and maybe even how the micro tiny economy of Wallenstein works. And so I think it helped me always, as I went to bigger and bigger kind of contexts that were more and more complicated. I think I dove into them with the idea that I could figure them out. I wasn't sort of intimidated by or cowed by it. Now maybe I was a bit delusional in that I could figure things out, but I sometimes thought some of my classmates who grew up in Manhattan when they were a child sort of gave up on the idea I can understand how this whole system works because it's just too complicated, and maybe thought all I can do is understand a little part of it. And so I think the gift I was given by coming from that environment was to say, why not try to tackle the whole thing and see if you can make sense of that. So that may be fanciful sort of ex post rationalization, but that's one thing that I think I feel fortunate to have come from that small town environment.
Yeah. And I really get that every perspective is a gift, as long as we understand that's not the only perspective to have. And you would have been confronted with that right away.
Yes, that's right. No, it was, I will say when I got to Harvard College in Boston, one of the things that I didn't realize I'd miss until I got there was in Wallenstein, when I wanted to be alone. I would go for a walk, and in 800 yards or so, I would be alone. I mean, really alone. And I could walk as far as I could possibly walk in Boston, and I would never be alone. So I missed that. So I had an adjustment for sure.
So we're here tonight to talk about your new book, When More Is Not Better: Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. Here, I've got it right here. And it's ultimately quite hopeful and practical book to address some of the problems that a lot of us are starting to feel. What is that problem, and why does it matter, and why now?
Well, the problem is, I think after many years, so I focus on America, but I think it has implications elsewhere. I just focus on America as it's farthest down a path that I think is sort of problematic on this. But for many years, pursuing more efficiency in the economy was a good thing. It actually helped raise productivity and help the United States and similarly Canada become a very wealthy, prosperous society. But in the last 40 plus years, 40 to 50 years, the last half century, I think we've been pushing efficiency so hard that it's been having counterproductive impacts on life, on the economy, on businesses, on the environment. And so the book talks about what happens when you start taking something that's a good thing, efficiency, and pushing it to the extreme. And you start to get extreme outcomes. And there are many such extreme outcomes that we don't really like. One is extremes of income inequality. One is extremes of domination of few firms in industries. Another thing is more fragility in economic systems and environmental systems, and all of that is understandable, as it turns out, if you think about the complex adaptive system. The world we live in is a very complex adaptive system, and when you put more and more pressure on it, it starts to act in ways that we are now seeing. It goes from being a balanced system. If we just take the economy for a moment and income, it goes from a balanced system where you have a large middle class and smaller tails of rich people and poor people. And you can have a nicely running economic system where that improves every year, and you tax the richer more to help fund the chances of those in the poorer tail to make a better life for themselves. That starts to break down, because as you put more pressure on the economy from this obsessive pursuit of efficiency, what happens is that distribution changes, if you will. It's almost like taking your hand and squishing down the middle of the bell curve, and what you end up with is something that looks more like a ski slope, with most people clustered at the low end, and then a long tail of extremely wealthy people. And that, I think, is not an outcome that anybody wanted. Nobody designed the system to create that. It's happened, and it's happened, I think, by accident, but it's having dangerous consequences in that and all sorts of other issues.
Yeah, and for sure, I mean, we see this in agriculture as well. And so we might actually need you to get that headphone back into your ear, if that's what works for you. Thank you. We in your book, you talk a lot about a proxy, like trying to measure just one thing, and that being the be all and end all, and that having some unintended consequences. Surely, like, we see that around rural areas, like less and less neighbors every year, and what that means for a community and quality of life. What are some other examples of some unintended consequences of this, this race to efficiency?
Yes, you're pointing out, Mel, something that's a very important sort of piece of this negative puzzle, which is it's not just pursuit of efficiency, but it's pursuit of efficiency as measured with certain proxies. Yeah. So I would use wage rates as an example. So companies will say, well, I have to pursue efficiency in my labor costs by making sure I get the lowest possible wage rates that I can get. Now, that may feel efficient, but there's a difference between low wage rates and efficiency, right? That's just a proxy for efficiency. And in fact, right, if you are a retailer who keeps grinding down your wage rates, and you view efficiency as trying to minimize the number of labor hours, so you minimize the number of labor hours in your store, for example, then what happens is, while you may think you're getting more efficient, you say, oh, my labor costs are down. What you find is customers stop showing up because it's a miserable environment in which to shop. You can't find anybody to help you. The people there are turning over very quickly because they don't earn a living wage. And so you say, I'm going to go somewhere else. So you may fool yourself into thinking you've become more efficient, when in a more broad sense, you're becoming less effective. And in the, I'm sure people here like Costco too. It's Costco is an example of a company that goes against that, right? They've said we're going to pay people extremely generously. Nobody in Costco makes less than $20 an hour to start, which is way higher than retail wages. And they say if they come to work not worrying about putting food on the table, if they come to work thinking there's a real future at Costco, that we take care of them, they'll take care of our customers as well, and customers will love the experience and they'll flood back to our store. And so while it may not appear to be efficient to those people who measure efficiencies with these inaccurate proxies, it ends up being way more effective. And I know from talking to you before, you worry about proxies that people use in the farming community sometimes that actually are bad for long-term effectiveness.
Yeah, like if we're just measuring bushels per acre, and over time, if that's our only proxy, if that's what we're looking for, we're eroding the soil, and over time eroding the ability of the soil to make bushels per acre. So even just changing some of those proxies, even profit per acre, surprise surprise, would be a different one, or the improvement of the soil. But
yeah, so that's the same as, I mean, the analogy I think is so good there. That's the same as eroding your customers' belief in you as a good destination to shop, right? Yeah. So you might say in year one it works. Oh, hooray, it worked. We got our labor costs down, so we put a few more dollars to the bottom line because the customers hadn't figured it out yet. It takes customers a little while, but then next year you say, gosh, our labor costs are still down, but our top line, our sales are down, and the size of the basket, how much they buy when they're in the store is down. That would be the moral equivalent of saying, wow, why didn't we grow as many bushels this year? And they would send out an expert, and they'd say, well, that your soil is producing as many bushels as it can because you've abused it. So I think there's from what I can tell, there's a real parallel of pushing efficiency and these imperfect proxies for efficiency. And again, I'm not against the idea of proxies. You have to have some way of measuring something. But the minute you start to think the proxy is the thing, right? So labor hours or wage rates equal efficiency, you're in trouble. If you say, well, it's one measure of efficiency, but it's not efficiency in and of itself. That's what you've got to think. So I don't mind people saying I would like to get bushels per acre out. You know, that's sensible. But if you say that is the only way to think about it, will lead you to do things that get that to be higher in the short term and perhaps disastrously lower in the long term.
Right, like it totally undermines the way of measuring success, totally undermines the outcome of success. But one of the biggest issues we have in agriculture is that we don't have quarterly reports on how we're doing. Like the soil is eroded over a generation, and it's almost invisible too. It's not like a report you can share with your with your shareholders.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. I mean, a great scholar who wrote a great book a long time ago, Peter Senge, wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline, and said, you know, systems become more complex and difficult to understand when there is greater distance between cause and effect. And that distance can be geographic distance, but it can be time. And what you're describing is a long gap between cause, things you're doing to the soil today, and effect, the impact on the soil. And I think in situations like that, it's just important to be I think careful and conservative, right? You know, it's not unlike, you know, brushing your teeth. You know, when you're a kid and your mom or your dad is on you about brushing your teeth, I mean, I think, you know, you could say, well, you know, kind of why? It doesn't really matter. You know, my teeth are going to look the same tomorrow as they look today. But what they instill in you is this notion that, you know what, there's a gap between the time you stop brushing your teeth and when you get cavities and your teeth fall out, but it's coming. And so to have a sense of it's a system, and I think of brushing teeth as buying insurance, right? Yeah. Do you actually think your house is going to burn down, right? No. But you do have to ask the question, how disastrous would it be if my house burns down? And the approach you take to that is buying insurance, which, if all goes well, you could say after the fact, I wasted all that money, right? Because your house never burnt down, but you want to buy that insurance. I think on things where there's a big gap between cause and effect, I'd buy insurance. I'd say, by the time we feel the effect, it's going to be too late. In such a situation, I'd say I'll buy some insurance against that. And I think the insurance that's wise to buy in that sense. So the insurance that Costco is buying is, I want customers to love us 10 years from now, and to have a Costco habit where they say, whenever I want to buy something, I'm going to go to Costco. And so my insurance is having excess staff and staff who are paid more than what we could pay them. I think what you're saying is exactly the same. You'd want a farmer to buy insurance, even though they might not see the soil decline next year. It may go off the edge and into precipitous decline, whatever, 5 years or 7 years from now. So buy a little insurance. And the insurance is spend a little resources now on protecting the soil for that later date. It's at least that's the way I think about it.
That's a great way to think about it. Obviously, when we think about insurance, we first think about crop insurance, but this is this is different. Crop insurance is actually maintaining this this drive for bushels per acre because it's a production
It's that.
insurance,
Okay,
right?
I didn't know that was a
It's
term
not,
of art.
well, we
I'm
don't have
thinking more
soil
metaphorically.
insurance.
Yeah.
Soil
Yeah.
insurance, but this would be another issue is, okay, some farmers are putting that money towards their soil, is putting that investment of time and resources towards it, but others aren't. So in a sense, some are investing in insurance and others aren't, but you're all in the same system together.
Yeah, that's of course a tricky situation. If we get back to houses burning down,
Yeah.
of course, because one house burning down can cause other houses to burn down. That's one of the reasons why we have regulations, and that's why in Toronto, after there was a fire that burnt all the wooden houses down, they said you have to make them out of brick. And
mandatory insurance.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so I do think there is a role. I mean, I'm not, and I don't think many country people are in for a giant invasive role of government. But I think there are times when there are these externalities, these system dynamics impacts that saying this is how we've got to take care of our land, because when we didn't, way back when we had the Dust Bowl, right? I know that's ancient history now, but it had a devastating impact on vast swaths of the West, and that kind of thing is the kind of thing you got to be careful about.
Yeah, thanks. It's always great to just get a new perspective. I know we think a lot about these issues, but really appreciate your perspectives. And I don't want to dwell too much on the problems as well, because your book is ultimately very hopeful. Approximately 57% of the book was set to the solutions, and that they are practical and they're happening right now. So what is it that you're seeing that makes you hopeful?
Well, as you know, because you've read the book, what I said is I have 18 recommendations in the book, and all of them are things that are being done, have been done, or are being done elsewhere that have succeeded. So I'm hopeful because there are solutions, I think, to all the problems that I identify in the book. Not all the problems in the world, I identify a subset in the book, but that are already in practice, and we just need to do more of them. One of the things I talk about is government kind of legislation, and what I argue is, in this sort of complex adaptive system where it's really hard to figure out when you pull a given lever what actually will happen. I mean, economists and policymakers are way more confident than they should be. They're like sure that if we do this, this will happen, and it rarely does. Given that, we should put a requirement for review and revision into every legislative move we make. Every new bill should have in 5 years, we're going to review this and revise it. Now, some people who I say that to say, well, that would be crazy. You can't do that. But Canadians who know the banking system don't say that, because the Bank Act, our omnibus legislation that controls financial services, and it's a bigger and more important bill than any single bill in the United States. So we have one kind of giant one. The wise people who put that in place in 1871, right, 4 years after we became a country, put in a mandatory review and revision. Every 10 years, you have to review seriously and revise the Bank Act to keep up with what's been happening in the industry. And it worked so well and was thought so positively, it was changed to a 5-year period in 1992. So anybody who, and you know, as you may recall, right, a bunch of banks either were going to go absolutely belly up or have gigantic multi-billion-dollar bailouts in the US, no bailouts in Canada, no financial distress of banks in Canada. What's one of the reasons? I'm sure there are many, but one of the reasons is our Bank Act was less than 5 years old at the time of the crisis, right? Because it's revised every 5 years. Not so in the United States. Ancient, old legislation controlling banking. So I don't want to be told by anybody, right? No, you couldn't do that. That's unwieldy. That doesn't work. It works, not with something little, something gigantic and central in the way of legislation. So it's things like that, or for business executives, just don't treat slack as the enemy to get rid of. And Costco provides a perfect example. Probably now the most successful right now, today's retailer in America has said, we will put slack into the system. They have the same algorithms as everybody else that says, given the likely traffic flow, here's how many labor hours you need on the store floor, here's how many cashiers you need. Costco literally just takes those numbers and throws in a slush factor. Let's add 10% or let's add 15%. And like, what? What are you doing? You're wasting money. No, we just want to make sure if Mel comes in and Mel's looking for something, Mel's going to find it.
I'm going to get it.
And she's going to put it in her cart and she's going to pay for it. And then we're going to be better off. And she's going to be better off because she doesn't have to go to some other store after that because she couldn't find it at her Costco. So everything that needs to be done is being done somewhere already and successfully. We just need to see these things spread to be more ubiquitous, I think, to reverse the problems we've had. And again, you're the expert. I'm not the expert on farming, but there's lots of farmers who are doing kind of what you would advocate in their fields. I think you would argue it's just not enough. And so if we had more, then we'd have solved the problem. So a lot of these things just need more players to adopt what is already succeeding. It's not, they don't have to take some big chance on something that's never been tried before. They just have to dive in and join the band of people who are succeeding.
Yeah. And I really loved that it wasn't like just waiting for a hero to come and solve this problem as if there was one solution. It really is, it was like a call to all of us to think differently and to start acting differently right now.
Absolutely.
And I love the way that you explained how we think in models, and the model of the economy as a machine or as a natural system. Could you explain that a little bit more for us, and what implications that has to shifting that way of thinking to a natural system?
Yeah. What I think has happened over the past half century is we've sort of dialed in on kind of a model of the economy and businesses in the economy as sort of machines, right? And a machine, let's take the car as a machine. The car is a complicated machine. There are many parts to the car. There's a drivetrain, there's a power source, there's a braking system, there's a safety system, there's an entertainment system, all of these things. And we say, well, what you can do is break that down and send off to the braking engineers, that problem, and the powertrain people another problem, the entertainment people another problem, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning another. And they can each optimize, and then we can stick it back together, and voila, it's a car. And in that car, you kind of know cause and effect. If you press on the gas pedal, it goes faster. If you press on the brake, it goes low. If you turn up the heat, the ambient temperature goes up. We've treated the economy that way. and you'll hear economists on TV. I'm an economist, so I can sort of be bad about economists. Economists on TV saying, "Well, the $600 billion stimulus package will produce this kind of economic growth," and then now most people they ignore it because it's sort of like dull and boring. But if you actually went back and checked, you'd find that they're virtually always wrong, and it's because the economy is more like a jungle than a car, like a natural system. It's sort of hard to tell where if you push here, right, it'll have this effect, or will it have this one or this one or this one? And that's I think a more realistic model of a complex system. So by system, it means all the pieces actually fit together and you can't disassemble them and reassemble them. They operate as a system. It's complex. You can't tell what causes what other thing exactly. And it's adaptive, right? So in a jungle, if a big tree grows, the trees behind it kind of grow on angles to try and get some sunlight. The system adapts constantly. And that's how I think we should think about the economy. And if we thought that way, we wouldn't try these grand master strokes to say we're going to fix the economy by pulling this lever. We would say it's a delicate system that we've got to treat with respect, and we tweak it. Try things and tweak it. Don't take vast, bold action, and keep on readjusting. And that's why I want legislation to be tweaked, because the minute you put legislation in place, people adapt to it. And again, it gets gamed
Yes.
by people who have very narrow interests. So legislation is supposed to be broad, benefiting the many, and the few come in and say, how can we manipulate this for our own purposes, and often undermine the intended effect of the legislation. I don't know if you remember the era when we said we want more scientific research in Canada. So we created something called the Scientific Research Tax Credit Program, and it was put in the budget as I think it was $300 million. It might have been $200 million thing. But what happened is people developed all sorts of schemes for trading these things, and the budgetary item ended up being I think they shut down the program when it got up over $3 billion. So it got 10 times as big as people intended, where virtually all of it was trading paper between companies and no more scientific research. That's a classic example of gamers coming in and saying, we're going to game the system you just put in place. So if we have a model of a machine, it's very sneaky. If we have a model of a machine, we just don't assume that's going to happen. Cars don't game you and say, "Oh, I know when you push my gas pedal, you think I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do that." It's just the car just does its thing because it's just a machine. And I again, you are the expert, not me, on farms and fields, but I suspect every farmer understands it's a complex system. You can know some things, but you can't know them with exactitude and certainty. And sometimes things happen that you'd be surprised at. And that's how we have to treat it. It's a natural system that you can respect, be careful with, tweak, but not take massive action thinking that you can change everything the way you want to change it with no negative impact.
Yeah. And just assume that carbon tax or carbon trading system would just work perfectly without anyone gaming it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can kill a bunch of weeds with DDT. But oops. I guess if you don't want any birds, that'll work out just fine. But nobody who developed DDT and wanted to use DDT said, I want to get rid of all birds of prey. It was just one of those things. Yeah, one of those things that happened.
Just the unintended consequences, and just of a narrow focus. Like, I'm just looking at this one thing. Yeah, and I really get that kind of a lot of that frustration that I have is when yeah, I thought that if I just pulled this lever, it would work. But it's not that it doesn't work, it's that our model and our way of seeing the world in the first place was creating that disconnect and that frustration. And I bet, yeah, that farmers and anyone on this call would get that a lot more, as we're always working with a natural system. But yet we still, I've got a lot of farmers like, just tell me the right cover crop. Just tell me when to plant it. Tell me how. Tell me when to terminate it. Bibbidi bobbidi boo, and Bob's your uncle. Like, but we're not getting that perfect system because there is none.
Yeah.
Would you say?
And again, this gets back to the education system. Unfortunately, to great an extent, the education system teaches that there is a correct answer.
Yeah.
Right. There are very few correct answers. They're just better ones and worse ones, and even our best ones change over time. Like we used to think for, over a century that Sir Isaac Newton had physics exactly figured out. That's physics, man. Like it's science. It's the way the world works, And now we would say he had it mainly right, right?
Right.
But why do we teach it as if it's right? Why do we teach kids that what they should be doing is searching for the right answer? And if it's the right answer, it'll get a red check mark, and if it's not the right answer, it'll get a red X. We're teaching them about a world that does not exist. Full stop. We teach them a world that doesn't exist, and what we teach them is to break that world into narrow, manageable chunks, more easily manageable chunks, and seek the right answer in each manageable chunk and then add them up. So it should be no surprise that you would say that that's the reaction that you get from it. Just tell me exactly what cover crop. Tell me the right answer, Mel. You're smart. Tell me the right answer.
Right.
We should not be teaching children that they are seeking the right answer. We should tell them that they're in an endless quest for better answers, and that whatever answer they think is most right today, chances are it will be superseded by a better still answer. Now, some people tell me, wow, that's a pessimistic view of the world, Roger. There are no right answers and they're all going to be wrong. And I say, boy, I mean, that in and of itself is kind of interesting. I said, what you are is incredibly optimistic about the present and unbelievably pessimistic about the future. There will never be a better answer. I am perhaps pessimistic about the present, but guess what I'm massively optimistic about? We're going to get better and better and better answers. I'll take that kind of optimism over the kind that's perpetrated now. So one of my views of educators is we just got to we as educators, what we've got to do is stop reducing into little silos and saying you can get perfect answers in little silos. Instead, we've got to teach people system dynamics. And kids can learn this. Kids can learn about ecosystems. Kids can learn about seeking better answers, but they won't if we teach them the opposite.
Yeah, and in many ways, it feels like our education system, I think you said this, is more of an unlearning of how to do this. I love, and this was a previous book you'd written, the Opposable Mind, and again with Jennifer Riel, Creating Great Choices. I love them. This is really integrative thinking is not just for businesses. I found it, like, even for my own personal life, is such great tools. Could you talk a little bit about what you mean by integrative thinking? And I think this is something that we can use in agriculture. To me, it's the heart of all the solutions that you bring up, is a new way of seeing. If you've got a choice between A and B, what do you say?
Yeah, if you have a choice between A and B and you absolutely love A and think B is a bad idea, choose A. However, if you're facing A and B and you don't really like either A or B, and every time you say, I'm going to choose A, you're saying, oh, but I will not get the things I like of B. And every time you choose B, then rather than accepting the wisdom you've been taught, which is, oh, this is the time to be tough and make that decision. I know it's hard, make that decision. That is the way of the universe telling you, don't decide. Don't decide, but now it's time to step back and ask the question, what is it about A and what is it about B that I would love to figure out how to, in a novel new way, combine into a C that's better than both, that contains elements of each, but it's better than both. It's a fundamentally different way of making decisions. It's saying, don't. When there is no great choice, don't make it. And the interesting thing, Mel, is that you can teach this technique to kids. Now we've done it successfully with kids as young as kindergarten.
Wow.
And I hate to tell you this, but they're better at it than graduate students. And it's because by the time they get to be graduate students, they are absolutely convinced that they have to make either or choices, and that's a badge of honor. If the kids, you just tell them, hey, we're going to create a better answer. Here's the two. Here's the best we got now. And they're like, ooh, boo, boo, I don't like that. Okay, here's the method for creating a better one. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds can do it and do it with enthusiasm. So I believe, and we've got a great initiative. If anybody wants to go online and look at it, it's called the I Think Initiative. That in the various Ontario school boards, Toronto, Hamilton, Halton, up in Ottawa, we are teaching teachers how to do this. The teachers love it. The students absolutely love it. And that's the kind of thing we've got to do to modify education. All the content we teach is just fine, but we've got to teach students a different way to think about the content that they're learning. I literally would want them to say, whatever Isaac Newton said or Albert Einstein said is the absolute best answer we've been able to come up with yet. But am I calling it the truth? Nope.
No.
It's the best answer we got yet. And maybe, some smart, way smarter than me, physics student will figure out a better still answer.
Mm-hmm. It really was, and I'd encourage everyone to look at this book too. It really was exercises we can do. It's almost like the rules your mind can use to break from the rules.
Yes.
That your mind makes. In this is how to get yourself out of your own way of thinking, is first being able to look at your own current way of seeing the world and then transcend it in a sense by asking these questions. Instead of disagreeing, what in that person's perspective am I missing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what you're referring to is and this is too big a word or concept for a guy from Wallenstein. They call that metacognition. I just call it sensible, but the idea would be your view of you in the world is, I have a view worth hearing, but I might be missing something.
Yes.
See, I don't want people to go around saying, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think? What do you?" As if they don't have a view. But I also don't want them to going around the world saying, "I'm right. I'm right. I'm right." So I want the mix of the two, which is, I have a view worth hearing, but I might be missing something. The fact that you say to yourself, "I might be missing something," means that, Mel, if you say something that I'm like, "What? That's not how I think." Rather than saying, "Mel, what the hell are you thinking? That's wrong." My first reaction is, "Mel, can you just say more? Like, just tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking." That would be the natural thing, and then you'll explain it away, and I'll say, "Oh, okay. I may not buy everything all the conclusions Mel has come to, but she's thinking about this thing that never even occurred to me." Now, if I add that into my way of thinking, maybe I'm improved. And it all is opened up by simply having that stance. I have a view worth hearing, but I might be missing something. Yeah. Now, some people say to me, yes, but if I'm that way, then other people are not that way. They'll just roll all over me. And the good thing about human beings is they're reciprocal. So I swear, even if you don't have that in your mind, if I'm like, Mel, say more, what do you mean by that? Tell me some more. And then I say to you, Mel, here's what I've been thinking. You'll listen really carefully to me. Why? Because I've just listened carefully to you. People are reciprocal. That's a human condition.
And I see that's really transformative. Like ultimately, we are talking about the economic system, but it really does boil down to every individual. Like you say, this is an individual challenge that all of us can take on to kind of have integrative thinking and just create a lot more curiosity. But I want to bring it back to agriculture. A typical, I've heard this a bunch from farmers, that as if these were choice A or B, is save the soil, lose the farm. So you either have to save the soil or save the farm. How do you see that A and B choice playing out?
I would do the exercises that we point out in Creating Great Choices, which is to say, hey, save the soil and save the farm are kind of very high-level summary abstractions. And at that level, they sound like they are completely incompatible, like completely incompatible. So let's just dive below that. And how exactly does save the farm work? What does that model look like? Okay. And I say, let's fall in love with that. Let's say I'm excited about saving the farm. What are all the cool things about saving the farm? So even if I think save the soil is the thing I care about most in life, I have to drop that for a minute and say, save the farm. Yes. Then I go over to save the soil and say, well, how does that whole save the soil thing work? And from my experience, Mel, it has never failed that if you do that exercise to say, how do those two models work, you'll come up with a better model than save the soil or save the farm. And I'm not knowledgeable enough about either the soil or the farm. I mean, I came from farm country, but we sold feed to farmers rather than farm. So I'm not enough of an expert to know what the answer would be. But I would say, Mel, if you and a group of people who understand something about farms and something about soil did that exercise, you'd come up with a better answer.
Yeah, no, it's a transformative way of thinking for sure. We'll hear from Dan later in the panel, but Dan Petker's got a great example that I brought up to you on our call last week about, he had a long-term rental. He was growing cover crops. He had a written lease. He was doing all the right things that we're trying to get farmers to do, all the best practices, but just got outbid by the neighbor that can just pay a little bit more because for who knows what reason, but they go back, they got rid of the cover crops, plowed it all up, and it kind of it destroyed the insurance that Dan was creating, in a sense, on that field. How do we move this ahead when we can so easily undermine each other as individuals in a competitive place on the farm?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think of it in the following way, which is that you have to figure out, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a superior model or a model that has bad logic to it, right? So if it's actually a superior model that you can, on a long-term basis, make more money getting rid of the cover crops and damaging the soil, then we have a fundamental problem, right? Because the economics are going to prevail over time, if that is superior economically over the long run, right? But if the case is actually over the long run, with the cost of money figured in an intelligent way, so discounted, if the sort of the discounted cash flow from that is better with Dan's careful management, kind of then I think the real challenge is information and making the case, because the case is a winning case. And so in this case, right, the missing element in it is the knowledge of the person leasing the land. Because I didn't hear you say selling the land.
No.
I heard you say leasing the land.
Yeah.
And so somebody who owns that land, if the thesis is correct that the NPV is actually negative compared to of the tilling it up as opposed to doing the sensible kind of utilization of cover crops, then the person who's going to be left holding the bag is not the outbidding farmer, because they can kind of head off to the hills after having made short-term money and essentially damaged the economic life of the lessor. And so I would be trying to make sure that people leasing their land kind of understand the economics of that. That's where I would go to. I would not try to stop the guy from bidding. I would be trying to give the lessor the best data you can give him or her about what the cost, the all-in cost of leasing to that person rather than leasing to Dan.
Do you think there should be some sort of a threshold, like we will not go below this level for sustainability? So if it's regulation, or what could it look like? As we know, people game the system, right?
Oh.
So
yeah, it kind of depends, kind of, Mel. What I'd be trying to do is, if you can make that economic case, and you can get that case in front of, like, if Dan had that sort of a relatively kind of ironclad economic case that he could take to the lessor to say, here's the true NPV of your choice. Your choice with me is I'm going to pay you less because I can't afford to pay you kind of more, but I'm going to return to you at the end of this lease land that is worth more. And so if you take that into account, and if you lease it to this guy, this is what you will get back, and it's worse for you. That would be my first line of defense. I would be trying to equip people on that. If that just didn't work, and you were, risking creating a, prairie-style dust bowl, whatever, 100 years later, or more, I guess it was. It's 100 years later. I would say it might be time for some kind of zoning type legislation, because I mean, in cities, the zoning is pretty damn draconian, right?
Yeah.
You can't build closer to the side, all of that stuff. So it's not as though in manners of real estate there isn't zoning that is designed for the greater good, as opposed to the individual who happens to have that piece of land. It'd be much better for that individual to be able to build right out to the edges of it and as high as they want. And you say, sorry, that's not the greater good. So I'm not at all adverse to greater good arguments, but I tend to try and put them in behind kind of market-based systems. And what and will it work out perfectly? No, but if Dan was able to have the ironclad facts to be able to present to the farmer, and the farmer chooses to depreciate his or her land, I wouldn't necessarily say I have to stop that, because it has a benefit. which is a demonstration project, so that you can then study that and say, and here's how much he lost by leasing his land or her land to this guy instead of Dan. And you have to play the long game on these things, and not be too distracted by a short game aspect, even though it's painful to watch.
Well, yeah, and definitely farmers can understand that it is a long game, but ultimately it's a long war and really short battles every year.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, we've only got just a few minutes left, so I wanted to just leave on a really hopeful note. And I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what was behind this book? It is like ultimately really hopeful, and what makes you so hopeful, and why did you write it?
Well, I wrote it because I'm a hopeful guy. I always am. I think that for one reason or another, the world at various points in times falls prey to models that feel logical in some narrow sense, but in a broader, more holistic sense, are just kind of bad models. And I guess I see the great leap forward that we can make by making our models more sensible, right? And so that's why I'm always optimistic. I mean, there was a time not that long ago, Mel, that you couldn't vote because we couldn't trust women to vote, right? That was a model. The frailer sex, the frail sex, is not capable of voting. Well, that's a model, and there's some logic behind it. It's like, well, they're different than men, and and men run things, and like there's all these things, and then kind of somebody comes along and says, "I'm gonna really." How's about we look at it in this broader way, and then like a proverbial switch gets flipped, and you're in a very much better position. I think we go through this all the time in humanity, where we just have bad models. Hey, there's a big thing there called Lake Erie. Why don't we use that to dump all our garbage in?
Yeah.
Right. That was a model. Just flow the sewage right in there. And then all the fish die. And then we got a model that says, you know what? If we kind of took care of the area around Lake Erie, maybe this thing would come back to life. And sure enough, we have a vibrant Lake Erie. So that underscores my confidence. Bad models need to be tackled and replaced with superior models. Right, not right models, superior models, and then superior models and superior models, and so that's the attempt of this book, is to say, you know what, this model that we've been using is not producing the outcomes we think it should, and I want to provide the world with a better model, and I sort of think I've taken that on for one reason or another, Mel, and then maybe.
Anytime.
Well, thank you so much, Mel, and Roger. Thank you so much. I was following the chatter during the talk, and the endless quest for better answers got a lot of attention amongst the academics and a wide variety of people. So it's something that I think really frame how we think about these issues. And so from everyone here, just I want you to know how much we appreciate you being willing to share your insights and your wisdom with us on this important issue. And Mel, thank you for leading such a wonderful conversation. You brought to light a lot of important issues, and it was really fantastic.
She's spectacular. She's spectacularly good at doing that. So I just want to chime in and agree on that, John.
Yeah. And I'd really like to thank OAC 59 again for their support. They had the wisdom to establish a Future Thinkers Fund, and that fund is intended to bring people who think about the future and who challenge us to think differently about the future. And Roger, you're the kickoff speaker for that fund, and so I think you've really set a high bar for us, and I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate the support from OAC 59. And I'd like to thank the audience for your willingness to be here and your engagement through the chat. We're not done. We're not quite done. We're about halfway there. We've got a fantastic panel coming up that's going to start to unpack some of the things that Roger and Mel talked about and frame it around some issues that we know are near and dear to our heart around farming, soil health, soil conservation, and how we do better, how we build better, and how we find those better answers, as Roger has suggested. So I look forward to following the chatter and hearing the panel, and hope you all will stick around. I think it's over to you now, Mel.
Ooh, I get to talk again. Okay, next up, we are moving into a panel that's an all-star panel in Ontario that's going to unpack what Roger was just speaking about. They've all read the book as well and are really just applying it to the different perspectives that that they all have in agriculture. So start up, I'll just introduce everyone. Crystal Mackay. Crystal connects consumers, farmers, and food system partners with the goal of earning public trust in food and farming. She has served as the founding CEO of Farm and Food Care, the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, and most recently her own company, Loft 32. So welcome, Crystal. And next up is Dan Petker. Dan, the one that we were talking about. Dan is a chef turned farmer with a passion for soil health. He's now the third generation on his family's farm near Port Rowan, right along the shores of Lake Erie. He farms with his father, growing corn, soybeans, wheat, hay, and of course, cover crops. Cher Mereweather is a leader in food and beverage industry sustainability, working to build a more resilient food system, one company at a time. She is the founding CEO of Provision Coalition, and she currently sits on the board of directors of the National Zero Waste Council and Birds Canada. And last but not least, Dr. Alfons Weersink. Alfons is a professor and researcher at the Department of Food, Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph. His research focuses on the impact of new technology and government policy on farmers' decisions, and then the impact of farmers' decisions on markets and the environment. So welcome all four of you, Crystal, Dan, Cher, and Alfons.
Hey guys.
We're gonna get started with a free-for-all question. Kind of along Roger's book, this drive for efficiency comes at the expense of resiliency, and there's unintended consequences. What are some of the examples of unintended consequences that you see in the agri-food system? Where are the places that we could use a little bit more resilience, would you say? Who shall I pick on first? Crystal?
Sure. I was timing to see when it would be you're on mute, you know, the race to the bottom, yes. The first to have to say you're on mute. So I won the first round. Thank you so much for being part of this event and this opportunity to be part of this discussion. I had all my thoughts lined up and then my brain was racing really quickly while Roger was speaking of all kinds of other ideas. But I'll stick with my original example. I think you know, as you mentioned in my intro, my interest is in public trust in our food system that starts at the farm and goes right through to the retailer. And the biggest example I would say of unintended consequences of a sector that focused on efficiency and growth at the expense of community, sustainability, and environment would be the worst case example would be Manitoba pork, where they weren't allowed to build pig barns for 8 years. And so all my crop friends are like, why are you talking about pigs? Well, pigs eat a lot of crops, and you know that. So, and it affects the feed business too. So and Manitoba had plans to double pork production in their province, but with very little regard for community and social responsibility. So the best science, the best technology, the best how-to, and you know, as we always say, science says if you can, it doesn't say if you should. And so with the race to efficiency, can we raise the most, you know, the most pigs, feed efficiency, etc., without enough regard for the other aspects of the balance of you're actually feeding people. And if you're not allowed to build a pig barn, then all your efficiency doesn't matter.
Yeah. When you've lost that trust, it doesn't matter how much efficiency you have.
Exactly.
Dan, what would you say to that from your perspective?
Oh, I fully agree. And I think the neat part is unintended consequences. As we try to resolve those issues, they also, like, you can have a cascade effect. So like when Roger brought up DDT, so we have eggshell thinning from the over application of DDT throughout North America. Now we have a massive ban on it, and most of us in North America would say that's a great thing. So do the birds.
Yeah.
But if you go to regions where malaria is a big deal, if you get rid of DDT there, malaria skyrockets again because the mosquito control is gone. So, we think we have a good resolution to what a problem that we created for ourselves, but that doesn't mean it always can be translated someplace else. So, like, DDT is still used around the world. It's used in our mosquito nets and that sort of thing. So it's, I was kind of raised in a way to always give a lot of forethought before you do an action and a lot of post thought to the action that you did. Well, actually to the results of the action. So consequences, we're always watching for them, whether they're unintended, like, well, that's actually a good thing because it's a challenge now. And it makes you rethink the process that you just went through, and it kind of sharpens and well, as part of the resiliency of the whole process.
Anything else that you see as an unintended consequence of this, what we were talking about, that drive for bushels per acre? What do you see as the consequence?
So that is a, if it's just drive for bushels per acre, like, then it's just a drive of numbers. So spreadsheets do everything we want. So let's say this case of me losing some land, that other farm operation, those economics work better for him. But now you have like this ramification of, I drove by the farm today and we're having a minor thaw event, the farm is starting to wash away. So just that. So it's an unintended consequence. Well, it was an expected consequence from my action of saying no, but it's an unintended consequence for the landlord to just go get an extra $10 an acre. It's a constant struggle, but I don't know. That's kind of what I see.
Yeah. Roger quotes in his book, there's no side effects, there's only effects. We just call ones we don't like side effects.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cher, what do you think are the unintended consequences?
I see two real unintended consequences. One is connected to the natural system and the other is connected to our people. Of course, on the natural system side, we're seeing the impacts on the natural environment. We're seeing the impacts of climate change, the impacts of waste, whether that's food waste or plastics or just waste in general. So we've become disconnected from our drive for efficiency and productivity and what that impact is on the natural system. And then the other serious unintended consequence is that connection back to our people. So the drive for efficiency and productivity and that machine thinking has disconnected us from the people side of it. And so when we think about the cultures of our organization, typically what we'll see is sort of three different types of cultures. We've all seen sort of the degenerative, I'll call it, where, they don't care about their people. They don't take care of their people. The organizational structure is all over the place. Communication is rampant. They don't communicate across the systems. It's very dysfunctional. And then there's sort of the transactional is what I would call it, the second tier, where they're starting to see some improvement in their organizational structure. They're starting to see some communication flows, but not all the time. And people are starting to be empowered, but not all the time. And I think when we have this machine thinking, the best we can get is to a transactional environment. That's the best hope, right? Because there's this impetus that it's a machine, and so when something breaks, we just replace it. There's no care about the people side of it. And what we should be striving for is this systems approach in which we have a regenerative culture where the people are the ones who create the system, where information flows so they can do their best work, where they are empowered and they can stand with the company for something more than just making money. So for me, that's the unintended consequences, that we can never get to that living system, healthy culture because we are constantly focused on the machine, right? You hear this language all the time, like, let's, push the needle. Even our references are machine-like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's brilliant, Cher. And paints a picture of a world that I would rather live in, Alfons, what are your thoughts on the unintended consequences?
Well, you framed it in the idea that this drive for greater efficiency and the lack of slack in the system, Roger talked about, and the need for some surplus, and as a result, resiliency. I think that was highlighted a year ago with COVID, the pandemic closing the hospitality sector, and our supply chains have evolved over time to deliver food at the lowest possible cost and in quantities that it's almost unimaginable, right? And so farmers specialized, processors specialized, and especially distribution networks, something that I don't think most of the people in this forum would be aware of, but those distributions are focused either on the hospitality sector or on the food retail sector. And then with the pandemic, the hospitality sector was closed, and so that distribution sector dealing with them was closed. The processors had to change the nature of their product and the volume of product, and there was no give in the system. And so for a while, there was real questions about the ability of the system to respond, and questions about its resiliency. So that would be an example there where some surplus would have helped deal with that. Now I think the system has responded remarkably well, and so questions about, well, maybe we have got the appropriate balance between resiliency and efficiency, maybe not, or are consumers going to reward those companies that display resiliency, and maybe that means that a greater demand for local products. So
yeah. Oh, good point. What about those metrics that we talked about, those proxies? From your perspective, again, because you're coming from different perspectives in the agri-food system, how are we measuring success? What is that metric? And what impact is that metric having? And what might be a better way of measuring success in the agri-food system? Cher, what do you think?
Typically what we're absolutely. Typically what we're seeing when we're engaging with food and beverage companies is that they're measuring the typical stuff, right? My operational equipment efficiency, my labor productivity. So that's what we're seeing, and there's this hyper focus on those two pieces that Roger talked about in his book as well. And what I would suggest is you always measure what you manage, right? Or you manage what you measure. Yeah. And it's the introduction of new things that are maybe perhaps more qualitative. So we just started a partnership with In Rhythm out of the US to deliver what we're calling organizational health. And so it's an actual measurement that allows us to understand, well, what's the health of this culture? And so all of a sudden you can say, well, we can drive for operational equipment efficiency and we can drive for labor productivity, but what's happening to the health of the organization as a result? And if we introduce that type of a measure that says, actually, what we're seeing is that our culture is quite degenerative. What can we do to fix that and bring in some of those qualitative measures? Then we're going to have a better balance of how we manage what we measure.
Yeah. Cher, can I just, as an extension of that, let's say in agriculture, we're all well, I guess in a lot of business, or we all think in units. So be it bushels per acre, ROI per acre, that sort of thing. And we can bring it down to in relation to this conference, soil health. company health, business health, family health. Like, how do you apply a unit so that we can conceptualize these things? Because they're so amorphous and big that a lot of us don't know how to answer and really conceptualize what it is. So if you can't kind of envision that thing, how do you approach it and manifest it and make it better, or just even start with it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Anyone have an answer? Oh, Crystal, I'd be interested to hear what do you think are those metrics and how we might be able to improve them to.
Well, I would say, I always think about when farm groups go to lobby government, they always start with GDP, how many jobs, what they contribute to the economy. And then on the farm, we have our economic, our profit and loss statement, right? Very much, how many dollars per acre, et cetera. I definitely feel, first of all, I grew up with Sesame Street, so collaboration and sharing is important to me. And I didn't even realize I was already living Roger's advice about instead of A or B, come up with a better solution. And I would say I've never seen a more opportune time than now to come up with better solutions, outcome-based, and look at new ways to measure success. Because if I stick with my pork example, if anybody's been following hog prices, our hog farmers have been bleeding for a long time, and so they're the ones that are buying your feed and your crops. And if we want Canada to grow X crop or sub in yours here, then at what cost do we not have a better way of measuring success and rewarding it? So I feel our existing metrics are off. We definitely need to look at new outcome-based measures that, because basically I'm seeing the pressure we're asked to put values on our value system now, and we're being paid commodity prices, and it's the farmer and processors are in the pressure cooker of, I'm being asked all these demands for sustainability, quality assurance, code of practice, audits. You want me to do all these things, but then you're still paying me a commodity price, and the old system is not equipped to deal with it.
That's a great point. Alfons, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, measuring what to do what. So, an individual firm, an individual business, they've got to make money, but there are other lifestyle factors. And then, as a sector, like the hog sector that Crystal's talking about, you want farmers to be successful. You want the sector to be successful as well. You want them to be competitive. And that might not necessarily mean that you keep every farmer in business as well, right? There's questions about that. And then you're sort of broadening it out to the impact that the sector has on the environment. And so there are other metrics than you are trying to assess. I think one of the things that stood out for me from Rogers is that don't worry too much about the metrics and just try to improve all the time. And that's when I think that's part of the reason why we trying to have something like soil health, because there's so many different elements to it. It's like a catch-all. We're going to improve soil health because it does so many good things, but you try to focus on one, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, he did discuss in the book, like making opposing metrics that creates the tension whereby you start looking for that option C in I think you talked about Southwest Airlines said we're going to have the lowest price ticket airfare and the best customer service.
Right.
They weren't settling for a trade-off. Oh, it has to be this because we can't do this. They were making no excuses by making those opposing metrics. Yeah. Dan, what do you think? Maybe I'm putting everyone on the spot, but I really love this short game, long game idea. Do you see any easy solution to that
No.
tension? Oh shoot! Well, I heard.
Well, there's no easy solution. Like that's the struggle, right?
Yeah.
Like, like from personal experience, like I have these like this firm held belief in doing things in a socially and environmentally responsible way, as many of the people who are involved in this conference. But we have a lot of headwind that we're going against, because there's so much inertia to the system that we're trying to like help guide a little bit. Like we are trying to steer a ginormous boat, and our little tugboat isn't strong enough yet. So either actually just kill my business, or the approach. I don't know. I really don't know.
Alfons, has an economist solved this?
Yeah,
yet?
no, I think, like Roger suggested, for the solution for Dan was to come up with a net present value of his practices using cover crops or whatever else he does, and compare that to the net present value of the practices that some guy's just going to come in and do the bare minimum. It's just difficult to do because, he talked about this cause and effect relationship. There's it's a stochastic relationship. It's and we've got and it's a long time frame. It's 1 year. It's not like something in a factory where we can change day by day and find out, or even minute by minute. We've got 1 year, so we practice. We plant cover crops 1 year, and we see the carbon go up by this little bit, and well, maybe it didn't go up by this little bit because we had a bad rainstorm. But next year it would have gone up by this little bit if we had the right weather. So it's difficult to do in agriculture because of this gap between cause and effect, and it's difficult to demonstrate that net present value. If that was going to be the solution, then yeah, we could see.
And just as to continue on that, because like Mel, you brought the question up quite well, and the problem is there is no like the landlord doesn't lose any value in the farm. We could still sell that acreage. Like it could be some rundown piece of garbage, and somebody will still go pay $13,000 to $30,000 an acre. Like it makes no sense. So like the landlord doesn't really care, unless they have like this like a lot of us, like this deep abiding desire to be societally responsible and environmentally responsible. And then he has to have enough economy to carry that.
What about further on down the value chain, Cher? Like you're working with businesses that have to make some huge investments to be sustainable, and how does that decision happen with them?
Further down the supply chain, it's the consumer pressure, right? It's that the activism that's coming from the consumers. I mean, look at what happened when we saw the straw stuck in the turtle's nose. Suddenly we were facing a single-use plastic ban on straws and cutlery because the consumer said, "Thou shalt stop this. I do not want to see a turtle with a straw up its nose." So, those are the drivers, right? Is the consumer saying, "You know what, I need change. I need to know that the soil system is healthy. I need to know that I'm going to be able to buy local crops, and that the local food economy is going to be viable and resilient into the future." Certainly we've seen that with COVID, right? I mean, when I talk to some of the local food companies, they're like, "This is the best year I've ever had because customers are coming out of the woodwork and they just want to buy direct to me because I'm simply local and I stand for something in my business," right? I care about the natural environment, I care about my people, and I care about being a local business, and they want to support that. And I think that's what's going to drive the change, is when the consumer makes a difference with the dollars that they spend.
How quickly are they going to stop caring, though? Like once life kind of goes back to normal, because that operation, like he hasn't changed, or she, like that, their approach has always been what it is. So they've always been proper, like in the context of this conversation.
Yeah.
But now they've just been noticed,
That's right. And that's the biggest fear, right? Is that when we return to the new normal, are we in fact going to lose those customers, or are we going to shift back into the old ways?
Right.
And I think the onus is on the company to have that strength in its storytelling, in its transparency, in its authenticity, and the verification of its data that says this is the right choice, and that the responsibility is on the company to keep that customer, that they are the better choice.
That's fair. Yeah.
I would chime in there. I heard from a grocery executive last week in the prairies who said support for local was up 82%. And he was very innovative, where he said they identified processing bottlenecks, that they didn't have enough access to, for example, a jam making facility locally, or pickles. They were importing pickles from India, and people are like, don't we grow cucumbers in Canada? So the retailer was actually finding new processing partners to supply what the consumer wanted, which I've never seen that happen before. But it was driven, to Cher's point, by this 82% demand for Canadian product. And so I think what Roger said is really important here, because lots of my friends grow crops, and what you're doing in cover crops seems so far away from pickles or the grocery store. And so, but the reality is, using my pork example or any of these other products, you are part of the food system somehow, eventually. So how do we connect those dots and say, what can you do, add value to what's happening at the other end of the supply chain?
So as a commodity grower of corn and beans, where we are selling into a world market,
yes,
how do we do that, right? Like when we see a tender from China or Libya for 300,000 ton of X, the pool supplies it. Like, they don't care that my acreage was grown in a sustainable way.
Well, one thing I would say that I see as really positive is I've been on this bandwagon of promoting Canadian farmers and farming for a long time.
Yeah.
And processors specifically used to be very reluctant to do a made in Canada, even the little blue cow on dairy, any of that stuff. And you know why? To your point, Dan, they wanted the chance to buy something cheap on sale somewhere else. And if they got too married to the Canadian flag on their product, they wouldn't have that flexibility to buy what's on sale. So now we're seeing more and more of them shift to that. And so this concept of creating more of a made in Canada value proposition, not being Pollyanna, the commodity markets are real, I get that, but I do see some real made in Canada value proposition. And the example I'll share that this retailer used that I thought was really powerful was fair trade coffee. Regular commodity coffee was $1 a pound. Fair trade coffee was $1.80, with that 80 cents going directly back to the farmers. But it included, that's not a small amount of difference, like that's a huge percentage, but it was a new system. So if we use what Alfons said about, we're in a continuous improvement model, it's kind of like, I need a raise, but my base pay is wrong. So that 2% raise you're going to give me is not helping, right? So I think we need a fresh approach to some of these systems to say continuous improvement on its own is not going to get us to where we need to land.
Totally cool.
All right, let's get some ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, keep them coming.
Yeah, the commodity market won't change. I mean, that's number 2 yellow corn is going to be number 2 yellow corn, and China's going to buy it from whoever will supply it cheapest. But I think what the panel has mentioned is that there's an increasingly demand for some quality attributes associated with the production of corn, not the quantity attributes, but in terms of how it's grown and whether it's local, whether it's meeting some environmental standard, and increasingly it's coming from the final end of the supply chain, the consumers, or the McDonald's, the A&Ws, who are deciding what it is sustainable.
Is there some sort of a 2-tiered system going on here too, though? Like, Crystal, not all consumers are willing to pay $1.80.
A lot of them don't care.
That's right.
Well, do we just make more people care, or?
A little bit, I would say. So a few years ago, a big animal health company did a big global study of food buyers around the world and studies. And basically what they said was 94% of people are food buyers based on price first. And then 4% of people were more elite buyers based on what I call adjectives, you know, free from, et cetera, right? So the adjective buyers, adjectives are very, very expensive in food. So that's only 4%, but not to discount it, because 4% at a huge premium can be very profitable. And then 2% were the activist component, which hate everything basically. So that still left 94% in the food buyer category. But if we use that fair trade coffee example, it was a long game, to Roger's point, to a new solution, to say we've had commodity coffee always, just like we have commodity corn. But to create that new solution included a visit to the farms, an investment of the buyers in the sustainable practices, and with the acknowledgement, which, you know, Cher buys into this as well, it's not perfect. It's meant to be continuous improvement, and to say we're doing better because of this. And included education of the people back in the grocery stores so they could talk to customers. It is not a short term, you're in, you're going to make a buck and get out. It's definitely a long game.
Cher, what do you think about that?
You know what, I think as we start to see things like the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, which is a global initiative, and the pressure on the system for transparency and responsible sourcing, I think it is going to become the new normal. And I think that if we pretend that the commodity markets will prevail, I think we're being foolish. And the reality is that the expectation from the consumer, whether they're willing to pay for it or not, is that my food is safe, it's high quality, and it's produced in a sustainable way. And that's my expectation of the new normal. And am I willing to pay more for that? Some will, but I would say that the movement towards it being the new normal will become the normal.
And what's that going to mean on the farm, Alfons or Dan?
I think, I think part of it is just it's good. It's good for agriculture that there's going to be a greater differentiation. I think what Roger talked about in terms of this bell curve, in terms of almost everything, and the pushing down of the middle of that, is something that we've seen occur dramatically in agriculture as well. Throughout the whole agri-food supply chain. You can think about the number of craft breweries that have arisen, and but if the sector was going to just focus on commodity agriculture, on number 2 yellow corn, they're low margins, and there's not that many that will be able to play that game. So it's good news that there's going to be different things that people want, and I agree with Cher. I think that percentage that people are going to be interested in that will grow, and some of it's going to be forced on them.
Yeah. Is there an easy way for Dan to get paid more?
Grow marijuana.
Asking
right?
for a friend, because
asking for a friend. Hypothetically, let's call him Dan. I would say one thing I'm really hopeful about, and I'm starting to see the Titanic shift on it, is agriculture being presented as a solution to environmental issues and climate change, instead of just always being blamed as the problem. And the people in this conference know better than anybody on the planet, literally, how agriculture can be part of the solution. But your voice hasn't been heard, and it hasn't been positioned that way. So I feel there's a huge opportunity to take back some of the, not only the moral high ground, which we've lost to critics, quite frankly, on this topic, but also the economic grounds to say, things like carbon credits, and what are you doing to actually improve the environment, and how can we be positioned as part of the solution, which I think could be a huge system shift to be a better option than A or B that we have now.
Totally agree. And it's, and it's a bit of forward thinking on, let's say, the farmers who are engaging in some of these practices, because we are taking on additional cost to the business. So we lose like that machine efficiency. But like in Roger's book, that's a little bit of friction, right? So when you have a little bit of friction, it makes us all work a little bit better, a little bit smarter, a little bit different. So, I mean, like, my cover crop costs, like for seeding or any kind of bits of yield loss, like which I've had, or any of these things are now acceptable within our own company, and actually desired, because it makes us do different things smarter. So now we target our tillage into strip till, or we no till, or we very target everything now.
Yeah.
Just so that those frictions actually work a little bit better, and soon they become smooth and they just become, rote into the business, and the business is still successful. And then we have to find the next friction and take it on, like just find it, make it, and go.
It's funny that you're making a friction, but I mean, around the world, necessity is the mother of invention, but yet you're almost forcing yourself to you're putting yourself in a position where you have no other option but to be really smart.
Yeah, like stagnation kind of ends a lot of businesses, a lot of farms, a lot of like relationships even. Well, it's just kind of like these are things that apply to everything.
Yes, no, it's true. It's true. Another thing that stifles innovation, as I've heard, like in Europe, there's lots of more subsidies for agriculture, and there's very prescriptive about what you need to do in order to qualify for it, and it's killed innovation in at least
in a way.
Some sources that say that, but no, go ahead, Dan.
Well, so it hasn't killed innovation; it's just redirected it. Yeah. Let's take European cash croppers don't grow any GMO corn.
Yeah.
Their regulations for like pesticide and chemical applications are like amazingly, well, to me, insane in a way, but they're there for a reason, right? Like because they have a different paradigm. But you go look at their sprayers, and they're light years ahead of what we can buy in North America, like by far. So innovation is happening in a different way.
Because of the regulation that created.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's absolutely amazing. Like I would love a European sprayer. Like why would I want this North American crap? Because you can do so much more with that tool in our system.
Yes.
I just can't afford the thing.
Yeah. I was using the idea of incentives more as a segue.
Sure.
And Alfons, I'd love your thoughts on this. The idea that is resiliency its own reward, and I can see like a lot of Roger's examples were short term, where you could demonstrate it within a few quarters. But is resiliency its own reward, or is there a way to incentivize this without also creating another unintended consequence? Does anyone have thought?
Yeah. Incentivize for what purpose? So, for example, I think you talked about in terms of soil health, the crop insurance versus non-cover crop sort of soil practices. Well, then you can think of it more as self-insurance. Okay, I'm going to plant cover crops because they build resilience into the system, and I won't have to rely on crop insurance. So that's one way of where the incentives are targeted towards soil health, and the individual farm profiting from that. But I think a lot of the incentives, increasingly, the ones that you mentioned for the European Union, are meant to deal with externalities off the farm. So the Lake Erie example that Roger mentioned, in the 70s and burning, but the algae blooms now are largely associated with agriculture. So what are the incentives that can be put in place to deal with that? And then there are issues. Well, if you want to plant cover crops, how do you design a program that will encourage that? And so there is some of that, but there's a reason for trying to create some incentives to get people to change practices in the way that the public desires.
So how long do we keep it? Sorry, no, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Dan.
Because I think about this stuff a lot. I'm like, so incentivizing is great, But when does that kind of like the penalty come?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
let's
agree.
say we have these programs now in Ontario for leads. Like we can buy this stuff and get cost share, but some of these programs have happened before, and people buy new drills, like no-till drills, when all of a sudden they're like, oh, there's a little yield drop. I'm going to go start working my farms again, but still use this drill that I got for half price. So that person gamed the system,
Yes.
and we in the neighborhood all know that this person, or maybe I did it. I don't know. I've gamed other systems, but there's been no penalty. So we can always incentivize. Like I'm trying to get my son to potty train. Well, he can, number one. Number two, we're working on. But I'll keep giving him gifts. So now he's going to start, he knows that he can game the system a bit. So when the toys run out, where does the poo go?
Yeah.
Like, I don't, like, hopefully it becomes ingrained that he wants to go this way.
I love it.
Sorry.
I didn't expect a potty training example. I'm just gonna say
did.
you got me there, Dan.
No,
I would say it's if you look at it, things when you want to lead in a direction, you start with incentives, right,
Yes.
and bonuses, and follow the dollar. Then people will go there. Then the next line of thinking comes with it's the cost of doing business. You get that next after the incentive's gone, or for those that didn't sign up first, it's just the cost of doing business. This is how you have to do it, and then you get to the penalties, right? So the laggards, unless it's regulated or customer demands it, they're never going to sign up. So you kind of have the three categories. So if you can create innovative approaches with incentives to start, to get enough of a movement towards it, to show the people in the middle of the bell curve, where I went through university, by the way, Alfons, the people in the middle of the bell curve, that this is a good place to be, and there's enough proof that it's not too crazy that I'm going to shift to. And then the laggards will never get there unless you regulate them, right?
And then regulation at the last.
Exactly.
Cher, is that how that works in food processing too, Cher? How do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say something very similar, right? That we want to incentivize the progressive companies that can create what I call the full of the herd mentality, right? They get that incentive to create the path for everybody else to follow. And then we lose the incentives. It becomes sort of the cost of doing business and so on. That's exactly what we're seeing, certainly in my part of the food system, for sure. I also like this notion where government steps in and says, you know what, we're going to create these opportunities, but we're going to let the consumer vote on which ones they like the best. And so they create this friction in the system that says, this is the change we want to create, but we're going to let the people vote. I like those kinds of incentives too.
Does that rely on an educated public, though?
Not always. I mean,
Okay.
you let the public vote for something, and if it connects with them on a values system, there's a great example in the Our Food Future initiative, which is to create the first circular food economy in the city of Guelph County of Wellington. And what they've been doing is saying, this is one of the things that we want to happen in our local municipality, and here's how we're going to create some food security in an urban environment. Hey, community, vote for your favorite projects. And those projects get punted to the top and they get money.
Something that's been coming up in the chat is just the idea of Canada being like a small fish, but really the Canada brand is a trusted source of wholesome, healthy food. Does that work to our advantage in some way? What are your thoughts on that? Because obviously it's not just Canadian consumers.
Well, I have strong feelings about this, but we only have a few minutes, but I'll give you the Coles notes of it. Would be, first of all, our country has invested very little in the Canada brand at home. Most of the Canada brand money that the government has spent, and trust me, I've tried to apply for it, is like, oh, it's too bad the Real Dirt on Farming wasn't for a global audience. We would have funded it. It's like you have to have social license at home to grow the food before you're allowed to export it, right? So this concept of if Canada has this world reputation for safe, healthy, affordable, high quality food, which we do, and we have
Outside of butter now, all of a sudden.
Yeah, except don't get crazy. I wasn't going to mention
Sorry.
Buttergate, so don't even, don't tweet about it. Yeah, but if we say we do have that reputation internationally, so we absolutely should be using it. The individual companies use it to their advantage, and they put a Canadian flag on everything, right? So at home now, we need to start pumping it up to maintain this 82% greater support for Canadian products. A year from now, when people forget about they were sourcing local, to say we need that to become a habit to support your neighbors. Absolutely. It needs investment and strategy. It can't be just, oh yeah, Canada's great, carry on. That definition of insanity, doing the same thing, expecting different results, applies to many things. And that would include supporting the Canadian brand.
Anyone else want to chime in?
No.
Well,
Dan, really?
Okay.
Can we talk about potty training again?
But I don't want to do that. Like, I
Do
mean,
we want to go back?
Like, who am I? Like, it doesn't. Just one person too, but it's.
Well, I'd be curious to see what makes you hopeful. Like, I thought that conversation with Roger was like, he's extremely optimistic about the future, and I imagine all of you are, or I hope all of you are as well. What are you seeing that makes you hopeful? Where from your perspective, who's really driving that innovation, that integrative thinking that he's talking about? What are your thoughts?
All right, I'll go first. Okay. So what makes me truly hopeful is okay, let's say we picked up no-till, we went strip-till, which was completely new to the area. Targeted spraying, like all these things we're supposed to be doing, like planting green, which we don't do often anymore, but just covers in general, all that stuff, longer crop rotations. I start to see other farms around me or other farm businesses copying me or copying my dad and I.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's really awesome.
That is awesome.
Like you see this ground pounder for, like, yeah, it's fun to do, but this big chunk of iron that is absolutely just destroying everything we're trying to do. So, like, opposite end of the spectrum, that thing's gone. And now this operation strip tills, they no-till beans, they're growing wheat for the first time in 30 years.
Oh, wow.
That gives me that's really, but that was really cool. Like, that's really awesome. Like that gives me hope, because other people are realizing that we can take on a little bit more friction or expense, and our quality of life and our quality of farm business doesn't suffer. Or if it does, we learn how to manage that bit and just kind of go around it. And the best part is those these farms around us who are starting to copy, they didn't use any programs to do it. The incentive was, my neighbor is successful.
Yeah.
And he's going home sooner. And he gets this, like all the quality of life things that come with this. And I was like, that's it's an incredible sense of validation.
Yep.
And we weren't even looking for that.
That's brilliant.
It feels good.
Yeah. Cher, where do you see from your perspective, what's hopeful?
What's hopeful is I've now been doing sustainable food for 20 years. And when I started this journey, nobody even knew what sustainability meant. They thought I was pretty crazy in my words and my thinking. And now it really is becoming the normal. And what I'm most hopeful about is this transition between sustainability and now even taking it a notch above and starting to think about the circular economy and the circular transformations of the businesses, right? And when we think about circular economy, and so this is really about being inspired by nature's natural systems. It reimagines and regenerates the systems that feed us. It eliminates waste. It creates economic prosperity, and it takes care of our communities, right? The circular economy becomes the friction that Roger was talking about, so that we say, well, how long can we keep these resources in the system, even though it's cheaper to throw them away, right? That's what makes me hopeful, is that there's this notion that that we can actually go even above and beyond sustainability, and that sustainability is now becoming a common language across the board. That's what I'm excited about.
That's awesome. Crystal?
I'm an optimist by nature, and so obviously that's why I work in agriculture and with you good people. And I would say, without even realizing it, farmers are equipped for this job and challenge, right? You're in a continuous improvement. Since the very first person poked a soil with a sharp stick and dropped a seed in it, it's next year we're going to breed better crops, and we're just hardwired for that. So that's, first of all, we have the right people with the right brain power. Secondly, when we look at what we need to be successful, we need collaboration and problem solvers. And when I travel outside of Canada and the US to other countries, they're like, you can get the whole food system together in a room to have a conversation. Like, we can't even get all of dairy in a room or all of grain in a room. So we are light years ahead of the rest of the world in our organizational structure and ability to come together at events like this and to come together with other supply chain partners. So I think we have the right opportunities to collaborate, and we have the most excellent brain power on the planet that can really take on these challenges to be successful. And I get up every morning saying I'm grateful to work in this sector for a reason. I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with what everybody said. Very hopeful, and I think there's a lot of positives associated with agriculture. That the future is bright, and the changes that have occurred, and COVID might be part of the changes. I think that there's more agreement to be working within across the whole supply chain than there might have been before, and this idea of local. And I think because it's been difficult to identify a single metric for that gaming the system within agriculture, that we haven't had the problems that Roger talks about in his book. That's the foundation. Instead, it's like there's so many things that are part of a natural system that farmers deal with, rather than a physical model, an economic model that Roger talks about. That we are already constantly adapting, and whether it to be to environmental pressures or other forms of market pressures, I think agriculture is in a good place to do so. And I think particularly Ontario, given how the nature of our climate, we're much more resilient to or not prone to the same extremes that other places are. I think we're in excellent shape.
And we can grow an incredibly wide amount of things. Mm-hmm. Like, we have resiliency within the crops we can grow. Like, we're not tied to corn. Yeah. As much as people want to be tied to corn, we're not. Like, yeah. I don't want it. Like, if I don't have to grow corn in 10 years, ooh, that'd be awesome. What? I want to be home in November.
Yeah. John, what do you think? I could ask one more question, or
I think we got time for one more question.
Time for one more. Well, it really was just to summarize all this conversation, and after reading Roger's book, what was that take home message for you that you'd want to pass on to our listeners? I hope you don't have to think about it too long, because we don't.
Like, my takeaway would be a lot of just don't be afraid to take on some friction. Just because we have a certain process, or we're doing something and it's worked for a year, 5, 10 years, like, ask for an opinion from some, like Roger. It was perfect. Like Roger saying, like, go ask some other people, like, what am I missing, or what do you think? Yeah. And take something out of that discussion, and take it in, make it yours, and apply it to what you're doing, because all of a sudden things will get better or change for the better. Mm-hmm. Or they'll reaffirm what you're already doing, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else chime in, or?
I'm happy to go. I love this notion of tweak, try, tweak, right? This concept of getting better every day at everything that we do, and there is no right answer. It's just this constant improvement. That was sort of the big takeaway for me in his book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was a great book.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do hope that everyone does read it. I really
Yeah.
got that he was writing this out of a respect for capitalism and democracy, and really saw that there is like a threat to it right now, and it has brought about such good things. It's almost saving it from itself. So we need to look at where were the unintended consequences, where can we improve the model for the sake of everyone and for the sake of democratic capitalism. Not as we know it, as it could be.
Because it's supposed to be a societal good, not a business good.
Yeah.
This whole system for all of us.
Yeah.
Yes, it was so big in its vision, and also very helpful for our small businesses, but big.
Yeah.
Crystal, or anyone to finish up?
I would just say I really loved the model of the rules to break the rules, and it's okay to do so, and to just say you already have a continuous mindset mind, because otherwise you wouldn't be at a cover crops conference. So to say, okay, now let's go to the next level and say not just a percentage improvement, but say let's break the rules and say how can we reframe the end game, the end goals. You know, what's our new goals, and can they be bigger and better than our existing things we're chasing?
Totally. Okay, John, I'll let you pop in and shut this party down.
Well,
Thanks everyone, though. That was awesome.
I mean, no one wants to be that
Thank
person,
you,
right?
everyone.
But my mind is swimming. I don't know about you in the audience, but the ideas, the questions, and the thoughts, I hope you're also feeling the same. This has been very stimulating, and I keep coming back to this idea. Well, what do we do next? And where I keep landing is let's not what we heard tonight, like, as you call your vacation, and spend some serious time thinking about that. Then over the next couple of days, call someone or speak with someone you know, and share these thoughts with them. Be open to a conversation that challenges how you think about the ideas discussed tonight. It gets back at Roger's idea of metacognition and thinking about how we think. And we have to break down how we think sometimes to find ways to change. Explore those ideas and think about and talk with people about this, how you can work together to turn those ideas into action, and then commit with others in that community to help drive change. And then the third thing you can do is share how you're acting by joining conversations with us on social media. There's 2 hashtags that we have on this slide that you can use, hashtag integrative ag and hashtag MCCC21. That's a way to really, bringing the community together. I think, push them a bit, and it led to a lively and engaging conversation. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
And Alfons, Cher, Crystal, and Dan, I've never been on a panel where we've talked about potty training, so you brought some levity, but you also brought some very, very interesting perspectives, and some perspectives that I think sometimes are, a little bit of A/B thinking, and let's think about what Roger talked about how do we take those and come up with something new that reflects a creative way of solving a problem that isn't about a this or a that. It's a melding of those things. I'd also like to again thank the OAC, the Ontario Agricultural College Class of '59, and the Future Thinkers Fund. Without their support, we wouldn't have been able to have Roger here and be able to host this panel, so we really appreciate it. And I'd especially like to send a shout out and a thanks to the Midwest Cover Crop Council for willingness to partner with us on this event and on this keynote conversation. It's a great way to bring people together from the Midwest part of the continent and to talk about such an important issue. If you are looking to collect CEU credits, I believe there's a QR code showing on the screen right now that you can scan to get your CEU credits, or if you're not able to do that, email Anne Verhollen with your CCA number and the title session title that you see here, and you'll be able to get those credits. In terms of housekeeping for tomorrow, please join us tomorrow morning for our final day of the Midwest Cover Crops Conference. We'll be starting at 9:30 a.m. with a session on integrating cover crops and grain cropping systems. I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for being here today. There's a lot to absorb. I really encourage you to spend that time thinking about, well, how do you absorb that knowledge and turn it into some ideas, and then sharing that with people and turning that into action, because that's the only way we're going to facilitate change. And I think together we can make our farming systems stronger, and we can make the farming community stronger, and make our rural economies more resilient, which is ultimately where we'd really like to see things end up. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Take care.